Today we are going to be having a panel about resourcing the green economy. We have three excellent panelists here who have their own expertise in quite different, unique ways. So I think we're going to get a really interesting take on some of the topics around resourcing the green economy. We have Enrico, we have Richard, and we have Weston-super-Mare's very own litter fairy, Debbie. And I'm going to ask each of you to very briefly introduce yourselves, and then we'll get started with the first questions. Enrico, would you like to start for us?
Yep. So I'm Enrico Manfredi-Haylock. I'm a PhD student at Imperial College. I work on recycling lead-acid batteries, which is the old ones, not the new ones. They're the ones that start your car. And I'm trying to recycle them in a more sustainable way, which doesn't involve smelting them or chucking them in a fire pit and getting the metal out. And instead it uses liquids to do that. So you dissolve everything. So that means that things don't go up into the sky and pollution should be lowered. Yeah.
Thank you, Enrico. And Richard?
Yeah, I'm Richard Harrington. I'm at the Natural History Museum, like Theo, one of his colleagues. I'm a geoscientist. I work actually on looking at the minerals that we are using in the, particularly now in the energy transition. We're moving toward moving from using hydrocarbons to renewable technologies and electric vehicles. And there's a whole wealth of metals that are needed for that. So my group work on ways of trying to make sure that we exploit those minerals in the best possible way, looking for ways of minimizing their use. And if we are going to mine them, making sure that's done in a responsible way. So I work very closely with my life science colleagues because we want to make sure mining companies develop ways of mining that leave a positive legacy and not those horrible things that most of us think of when we think of mines, which are sort of waste dumps that are rotting away. There is a better way of mining, and so we're working to help that happen. Thank you, Richard. And Debbie?
Yeah, I'm Debbie Apted, and I'm the community lead for Plastic Free Weston-super-Mare, and that's a surface against sewage campaign, which has been going for 5 years now here in Weston to free where we live from single-use plastic. So that's what we try to do and work with communities, and it's evolving now into helping with the climate emergency.
And very briefly, where did the term litter fairy come from?
That came about when we were litter picking at Pride, the Western Pride Festival one year, and I thought, well, I must dress up, and I had a Day-Glow tutu, like you do, and I thought I'd wear that, and a nice bright neon-coloured top, and then there was the Day-Glow lei, and then I was going to have a thing on the back saying Litter Fairy, and then somebody donated me wings and dealy boppers, so it's gone from there year on year, and it makes people aware that we are out there and about and sort of trying to keep the litter free from the town. So.
Fantastic, thank you so much. Okay, we have some questions and some topics that we're going to be talking about. There will be an opportunity to ask questions, but I think we'll try and keep it to certain times and ask if anyone's got any questions, and there's definitely time at the end for questions as well. If we do questions throughout the whole thing, it might mess up the flow a little bit, so that's how we shall do it. Richard, I would like to start by asking you a question. Can you give us a quick overview of what is meant by the term circular economy?
Yeah, well, that's a great question, isn't it? Well, circular economy, in an ideal world, is that there's effectively a use for everything we have that is, so that what we don't have anything called waste, basically. And it's eliminating waste from our lifestyle so that we might use something, we might take a product, use it, but then it goes on to be used for something else, and it will come back again and keep cycling round. So that effectively we have nothing, there's no throwing things away because we are going to be reusing everything. So in an ideal world, of course, with no growth, no change in population, you can imagine you could keep that as a closed circle where everything goes back to be used again, either upcycled or recycled.
Thank you. And Enrico, this is directly linked to your current research, am I correct? So you're researching how lead batteries, which are very widely used for an energy storage system, how they can effectively and safely be recycled. Could you tell us a little bit more about it, please?
Yeah, so actually the thing which many people may not know is that lead-acid batteries are already a circular economy in and of themselves. In fact, they're one of the success stories of a circular economy. About 96 to 99% of lead-acid batteries in the developed world, depending on what country you choose in the OECD nations, is recycled. It's collected and then recycled at a central facility and reused to make new lead-acid batteries. So that's essentially where it ties in, because the circular economy model is very much possible. We're already doing it for certain products. So we just need to expand it to others. Lead is uniquely easy to recycle because of the very low melting point. So that's mainly why we do it so often, and also it's to keep it out of the environment, because we now know very well what the consequences are of letting lead loose in the environment. And sadly, many people still have to suffer that in developing nations, but that's a point I'll touch on later. But essentially, yes, the circular economy already exists, and therefore, we just need new technologies to apply to different products.
And how can we take what you're learning from the lead side of it to newer technologies such as lithium batteries?
Yeah, so the idea is to essentially, my research particularly is trying to displace smelting. Smelting is not an ideal recycling technology because it can create a lot of pollution, and especially airborne pollution. And if it's not done correctly, the human cost is pretty incredible. So the lessons from lead-acid battery recycling would be to try and create a method which is easier than smelting, creates less pollution, and then try and make that more widespread so that it can be accessed both by large centralized facilities, as we do things here in Europe and US, or there's also accessible by small recyclers in developing nations. So you have these things called informal recycling operations, where it's essentially just a few people doing things in their backyard. If you're doing that by smelting, then obviously they're not going to have the right equipment to do that safely. If you're doing it with a liquid solvent, which can be put in a sealed container, then that becomes a lot safer, and it preserves that critical economic lifeline that these people need to subsist without having to essentially poison themselves in order to provide for their family.
Debbie, your work is obviously much more, comes from a different direction to both of the other panelists. And coming from the community-driven approach side of things, what are the key motivators for when you go out and work with communities for people to act more sustainably?
Yeah, that's a very good point, because I think working together in groups, and to be honest, the Sea Monster being here this summer has increased community engagement considerably, whereas we used to meet in our little groups and perhaps not have so much interaction with each other regarding sustainability. Because of this, we're mixing, our environmental group is mixing with the art group, and there's been all sorts of events and things happening, and you find out that everybody's got some kind of interest, but people want to know what they can do. I think people are either on the journey or they're not. So there's no point trying to speak to people at the moment, I don't think, who aren't on the journey. You need to encourage people who are on the journey to get more onto the journey, to look at things sustainably, what they want to do in their lives, what they can do, what's the easiest, what's the low-hanging fruit that people find easy. And once you start on that, then that motivates you. With myself, when I started looking at plastic, again, it was something I had no intention of ever doing, and I saw a video with a turtle with a straw stuck up its nose, which I expect a lot of people have seen, and I thought, I'm never going to buy another plastic straw, and I bought a metal one. And that was my first thing that I did. And then that motivated me, I'll go on a beach clean. So I went on a beach clean. Oh my God, look at all this rubbish here. I'm going to do something. And then I linked up with another person, and then we started the group with the Surfers Against Sewage, which we're now, Weston is one of 870 odd community groups across the UK. So motivates people locally because they can see improvement in their own where they live. So it's almost a bit of civic pride and getting together with people and just motivating them really. So
And what do you think, then, Debbie, would be a good balance between individuals being encouraged to take positive actions versus kind of higher level policy changes that could be implemented at that higher level?
I think personally what I find frustrating is that we try and do everything we can do. We do the beach cleans, we have all the meetings, we talk to businesses start reducing their single-use plastic. And then you find perhaps there should be some government changes. I was really hoping that the deposit return scheme would be introduced sort of this year, and it's now been pushed back a year or so, because I think that is one of the policy changes that would make a lot of difference.
And Richard, coming back to kind of the barriers to this idea of a circular economy, what do you think are the barriers that we're really facing at the moment to get to that place with a circular economy?
Yeah, I mean, I think actually coming fully to a circular economy is very challenging at the present time. I mean, one of the big challenges is that we are having a kind of an energy revolution at the moment, and so we really are really desperately trying to wean ourselves off using burning carbon for our energy supplies. Now, as a result of that, we're having to move to technologies that demand using new materials that have never been used before. So it's very difficult to develop a circular economy when you don't have materials to recycle. Lithium's a case in point. We didn't use lithium very much. We used it a bit in medicine and in batteries for cameras and so on. But now we're using it for batteries in cars. There's a huge amount we need to take out of the ground. And it's unavoidable. But so that's a barrier to a circular economy. But what we must do is make sure that when we make a product now out of something like that, we make sure that what Enrico was saying about, make sure our lithium batteries, we have a way of recycling those, that we don't throw them. I love this phrase my wife terms. She said, there is no away. You can't throw things away, because if it's away, it's going to go in the sea or it's going to go in a landfill. And actually, all the things you look at, you should think there should be an onward use of them. So although we might not be creating a totally circular economy yet, let's make sure we close that, if you like, the part of the circular loop where things become waste, and we should eliminate that. So we are going to have to top up our circular economy, but we should be looking at the waste end, and I think that's where people come in, because you make that choice of unnecessary wrapping on products. Take a bag with you shopping so that you can put your vegetables straight in, and those are the kind of things. So to me, we've got to close the leaky circle and recognise that we have to top this new circular economy up with new products, new materials. But let's make sure that those things are going to be recycled in the future.
So it's very much thinking about our current practices and where there's huge drastic improvements we can do there, but also setting up a future more sustainable system that will keep it going.
Yeah, because products always used to have a built-in redundancy, didn't they? We were always used to buy a new one, and the old one goes into the disposable razors. I don't think anyone ever says that anymore. Well, they still buy them, can't you? But thinking of things as being disposable should be a thing of the past, shouldn't it?
And Enrico, how much does this fit into your research, particularly thinking about the impact on recycling processes, of how things happen now? You mentioned you wanted to talk more about the impact of that in different parts of the world, and what we can kind of learn from those, and how we should be prioritising the next steps forwards with those.
Yeah, absolutely. So as Richard said, or as his wife said, there is no away every time you throw something away, or even every time you put something in a recycling, it has to go somewhere. In the UK, we actually recycle very little of our own waste. It usually goes abroad. And the consequence of that is once it goes abroad, you don't necessarily know what happens to it. Like, it might not even be recycled at all, Or if it is recycled, in the case of lead-acid batteries, when they go abroad, they often end up, there's a very leaky pipeline. So first of all, there are large facilities in developing nations, but they don't use the same pollution controls as they do in the UK or other developed nations. So a lot of the workers get poisoned. Then, after that, some of the batteries can actually fall through the cracks and into the hands of individuals who will then break them apart by hand in small sort of home workshops. And then a lot more people get poisoned through that as well. There was a UN case study from Bangladesh where this is done routinely. There's about 1,100 small informal operations, many of which are actually illegal as well. So it's not that this is condoned. It's not. But it's estimated that of those, about 4.3% of the deaths recorded in 2017 in Bangladesh were due to lead poisoning, which is a huge amount if you think about it. And it's estimated about 15.9 billion US dollars are lost in GDP, potential GDP, due to these people dying of lead poisoning when they could otherwise have been productive members of society. So it's a massive problem, and it's mainly just due to the fact that, yes, we recycle them, but we don't recycle them properly. And what is critical to ensure is that also not only to fix the sort of leaky pipeline of materials, but fix the leaky pipeline once it's actually gone into the recycling stream. And that's why alternatives to recycling are so important. Recycling shouldn't be seen as this panacea, as this be-all and end-all of the circular economy. It should actually be prioritized. It should be in a list of priorities where it goes reuse, upcycling, and then recycling should be the last option, should be the emergency option, when you can do nothing else with that material, because recycling in itself also uses energy, quite a lot of energy, in fact. It might be a third of the energy of manufacturing a new product, but it's still, the new product is like up here, and then the recycled product is down here, whereas upcycling and reusing costs you almost nothing by comparison. So that's the thing. It's like recycling is often touted as this sort of silver bullet, but it's absolutely not. In fact, it's rather the emergency button, because we don't know what else to do with this material. It's a bit better than sending stuff to land waste or landfill, but it should still be viewed with, I should reuse this before just chucking it into the recycle bin.
And that's horrifying to think that our waste gets sent somewhere else in the world and has that impact on the people that live there.
Exactly, unfortunately.
You mentioned there are some legal ramifications for that, but for countries like the UK and other countries that do that practice, are there better ways that could be stopped, that are being talked about?
I mean, not that I know of, but I'm also not hugely into the policy. Mostly I've researched the consequences. There might be some policy in the works which might stop this. I don't know, and I don't have authority. I don't want to talk too much about it because. But what I will say is that in the US there was a report about how many batteries were sent overseas to Mexico and how many poisonings that kind of well, it's very difficult to get the numbers here because a lot of these informal recycling operations aren't keen to disclose their numbers for obvious reasons. But if you look at sort of they could do some calculus and figure out, how many batteries were being smelted in Mexico and kind of have a rough idea of what the public health implications were there. And it's not great, and it's really a very inequitable situation where just because we can't deal with our waste, then it has to poison other people. It really should be that we can deal with our own waste in the proper way without having to send it abroad even. And I guess one point which I wanted to touch on, which is a barrier to the circular economy, is the fact that we produce so much just stuff, so many products that go into our economy which we can't recycle. In fact, we can't even properly landfill. I mean, currently I think that waste systems are being overwhelmed with the amount of fast fashion, for example, the amount of clothes that are being generated every year. It's kind of impossible to make a circular economy if your waste systems can't actually handle what you're generating right now. So it's not only that we need to stop sending stuff abroad, is that we actually need to stop producing so much, because the reason that we have to send stuff abroad is that we can't deal with it. And then it has dire consequences for people around the world, which it really shouldn't do. We need to stop exploiting other nations to have a better quality of life, we need to allow them to improve their lives as well without using our trash.
And that revolves, individual choices around how we consume and what we consume to make that kind of difference from ground coming up. Does, at this point, anyone have any questions around anything that has kind of come up? Yes, you've got your hand up over there.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, maybe I can talk about the lithium. Yeah, the onward use of lithium. I mean, the good thing about lithium batteries is that they do have quite a long life, these new ones, and most batteries could be used in different vehicles. So, the high performance vehicles will use a certain type of battery. But when they get slightly degraded, they could be used for used in a bus, for example. And then eventually they can go to become power static storage, in people's houses, because they don't need to be quite so responsive in the way they recharge. So, going back to what Enrico was saying, we can reuse a lot of those batteries downstream. We don't need to break them apart and recycle, because as he said, it's energy intensive, better to reuse if you can. So I'm confident actually that some of these lithium batteries they're making now could be used for at least 30 years, and that is quite comforting really, because they've got 3 sort of lifespans. The other thing is lithium is less harmful environmentally than lead. But there are other components that go into lithium batteries. So, for example, at the moment we put things like cobalt, manganese, and nickel. Those metals are a little bit more problematic environmentally, and we have to be a bit more careful with them. So, when it comes to recycling, we definitely need to make sure we've got a good. So when they've had their 3 cycles, if you like, we need to make sure we've got a clever way of doing that. So there are projects, we've got a project at the museum that's looking at how those end-of-life batteries 30 years from now can be, we can recover those metals. Because if we don't plan now, it will be too late. But the good thing is that, the European Union have got very good legislation about making sure these batteries get reused and we don't throw them away. And we just need to make sure that our governments subscribe to that, so that pressure is put on manufacturers that they're obliged to take those metals back.
And is the other part of the question was about the grade of the material once it's kind of, as it moves through time and its usages, and is that a factor there?
That is a factor, and actually one of the issues, for example, aluminium's very, very well recycled, but unfortunately, as aluminium gets recycled, its quality drops. And so, for example, the kind of aluminium that you would need to use in a vehicle, they can't use, or currently can't use, some of the recycled aluminium because it's got too much copper as a contaminant in it. So again, we've got to be clever there and make sure that which is why reuse is so much better, that you don't then have to degrade the quality of it. And so reusing is definitely, I mean, the good steel's fantastic. So the Sea Monster rig out there, I can see there's a market ready. We would buy that tomorrow, because we need, to make new steel, we need old steel. So that we know that will get completely recycled when it gets broken up. We're really good with iron and steel. We need to get as good with other metals. So there is that problem at the moment of the quality drops off as you recycle. But if you reuse, you don't drop that quality. So.
Thank you very much for that question. Thinking a little bit perhaps about how we move forwards. Enrico, with your research and knowing from the lead side of things and how we can implement that into economy moving forwards with other materials, could you predict kind of like the next 5 to 10 years, almost what needs to happen to get us towards that circular economy? What kinds of things need to be put into place?
So, as I sort of touched on earlier, I think the main thing we need to do is stop overproducing and over-consuming, because that's really hampering efforts to put in place recycling systems. You know, you can't build new systems if the current ones are overloaded. And also the other problem with recycling is that it's very low margin in most industries. I mean, in lead-acid batteries, it's mainly because of regulation and the fact you can't put lead back into the environment. In some other materials like glass, steel, paper, cardboard, they're relatively easy to recycle, so the cost is lower, and therefore you can, the difference between market price and your recycling cost is, acceptable. You can make a profit off it. Things like plastic and also e-waste, they are recycled to 8.7 and 17.4% respectively, the recycling rate. And that's so bad because it's so complicated to recycle those things. And the main problem is actually in the separation. Both plastic waste streams contain all sorts of plastics which have completely different properties. They melt at different temperatures. So you can't process them together. You have to separate them. But when you crush them up into pellets, all plastics pretty much look the same. So how do you separate them? E-waste is another bag of worms because it's just lots and lots and lots of different metals, again, all different properties. You can see them, but they're all sort of combined into one compact layer into a circuit board, which is very, very difficult to reprocess. And so the effort of doing that means that the cost of these materials, the cost of actually recycling is higher than the market price because the materials are kind of overproduced, given that the product is overproduced. So there's a lot of demand, therefore there's a lot of supply. And so, yeah, we have to stop overproducing so that the price of the raw material goes up so that recycling can actually take place at a profit, unless we want to actually directly recycle, on the governmental level where it's not done for profit. This is done as a service to society. That's obviously a choice for the politicians, not for scientists, for good reason. But it's a choice that we're going to have to make at some point. Making the prices of the raw materials higher is inevitably going to increase the cost. And at the moment, that's not a great idea, given that costs are already increasing at a pretty frightening rate. But we also can't let it continue in the way it is. And the other problem is that obviously when companies don't make enough money, they just reach the button to produce more stuff, which is not the answer. We also need to change the way that business is done. We have to get out of an infinite growth mindset because we don't have infinite resources.
Richard, I'm just going to kind of pass that on to you in terms of the next 5-10 years from your current role, of what you're thinking about, where you see changes happening. And I wonder if there's any other examples. You've already mentioned one about the Natural History Museum and what it's doing in its current research. How do you see the museum's role in this next 5-10 years with this?
Yeah, well, I think Enrico hit on something that was quite interesting, that the fact that, recycling is, in many cases, is so difficult that it's actually cheaper to go back to find a new raw material and go and mine it from the ground, because the cost of rare earth elements is a case in point. The magnets is what rare earths go into, but they're so different in their composition that you get a bag of them, and as Enrico was saying, they're all different composition. Whereas you can go to nature and get a consistent quality. And on the face of it, at the moment, it seems like we can go and open a new mine because that is cheaper. But what we're not doing, we're not putting the true cost on some of these things. And I think what the museum is trying to work to is, let's put true value on the exploitation of those resources. So we don't value, for example, like the biodiversity loss that might come from doing mining. There's been a recent report that talks about the value of biodiversity, and at COP26 it was recognised that biodiversity is a big issue. And we've not actually put the economic value on that, because it's enormously valuable. As you know, if say we lost all our bumblebees, we would have no pollinators, then a whole load of businesses would tumble. So you can put a value on that biodiversity, and we should be doing that. So actually, when you start doing that, then the cost of going and getting a mine opened suddenly becomes a bit higher, and it then means there's more pressure to, it's more favourable to go back and reuse and recycle. So I think we need to move, and what the museum is trying to contribute to is valuing the impact of what we're doing more properly across the whole supply chain for this, so that it's a level playing field. And when we do that, it will basically make the pressure to recycle stronger, because the economics of it will sit favourably against the economics of opening new mines. We do need to have new mines, but what we need to make sure is that they pay the true cost of their impacts on the planet. And at the moment, because we haven't been valuing the biodiversity impacts enough, there isn't a level playing field. And so that's something the museum's working very hard to do at the moment.
Are there, I just wonder, when you mentioned biodiversity impacts, in terms of emitting carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases and that kind of part of the recycling process, is that kind of quantified and taken into account when thinking about new approaches as well?
Yeah, it is. I mean, that's another concept we call life cycle analysis. So the whole supply chain, we should be looking at its impact. As I've said, there's the economics, but there's like the carbon footprint. And so all of these processes can be monitored, and it's actually been done quite well in the mining industry, because there are targets for carbon, CO2 outputs for industry, and indeed there's taxation if you exceed those levels. So there's some good metrics in there, and they're measuring those. So mining is definitely being pushed towards reducing CO2, mineral processing and recycling also. We are monitoring those things, and so increasingly that's part of the analysis. And I guess what we're saying is we should be putting biodiversity in there. And then the other thing is it's the social part, involving communities in this. And one of the things is where we need a lot of new minerals and materials for this energy revolution. And there's that big question of where should we be sourcing those from? And, as people, we eat food. We know there's a link between agriculture and the things we eat. Well, society needs to know there's a link between mining and the things we all use that aren't grown. And I think we need to re-establish that for people, so that we are aware that there is an impact to our use of materials, and it is this sort of mining. And we should actually think about whether we should bear some of the burden of where the mining is done. Bring perhaps mining closer to home, because people in Cornwall actually are quite positive about recovering lithium from the old China clay mines, because it's going to bring jobs, it's going to bring factories. We're going to be able to produce our own batteries for electric vehicles, and that's actually quite positive. And but it means the people in Cornwall will have a new mine in their backyard. And as a community, and maybe as a town, how would Weston-super-Mare feel about that if suddenly the answer to the energy crisis was something found in the hills at the back of Weston-super-Mare? Would you want to be a part of that and welcome it, or would you like somebody else to be having that burden? So these are the things that we're trying to get society to think about as well. So there's the society aspect that is coming.
A fascinating collaboration of interdisciplinary sciences, social sciences, mixed in with natural resource sciences to try and find that sustainable way forwards.
And this is where, bringing in Debbie's, as a consumer and a concerned person, you can actually become part, and you should be part of that debate, because you know, at the end of the day, it's there should be 3 Ps in any of these. There should be, okay, things should be profitable, but the planet should be protected and the people should be happy. So it's like, we shouldn't just be driven by one of these. Shouldn't be just driven by economics. We need to think about ecology, and we have to think about equity as well, don't we? So I think that's, so the you know, local people have to be a part of that.
I think there's an appetite for people to do whatever they can, but there is also a cost involved. I mean, at the moment, if your, shall I quote, kettle goes wrong, then you go out and buy a new one. Where are all the little repair shops that there used to be when I was growing up? They've all gone because everything's so cheap to buy now, and they're all in sealed units. You don't go. How many times do you go into a shop and you want one screw and you end up with a packet? It's silly little things like that that probably are quite easy to fix, but nobody does that anymore. One of our plastic-free business champions, they're electricians, and I went up to do an audit of all the plastic they had in their business. And what they've done now is they buy all their screws and things in bulk, rather than buying the little tiny plastic boxes each time. So they have big buckets of screws. So if you want a screw, you can take one. You don't have to buy a whole packet. So it's little tiny things like that. There's the scrap store here in Weston. I don't know if everybody has heard of the community scrap store or been to it. It's an amazing resource. It's I'm not a crafty person, and I don't consider myself to be creative at all. But I go into that place and my eyes just pop out my head. And that is all business waste. So it's keeping the stuff going. It's not throwing it away. So they have fantastic stuff in there. There's all kinds of different things. We've had the sewing workshops going on all through the summer. And we had Currying Conversations going on for the last 6 months where little videos were shown. And I think the people that attended were quite amazed sometimes. They didn't know how little recycling is actually recycled. They didn't know the impact of the fast fashion industry. I mean, until I saw a video, I had absolutely no idea that fashion changed every week nowadays. I mean, mine changes about every 20 years. So, but it is, to me, it's just unbelievable that there are new collections coming out every week, and the pressure on people to try and keep up with all this when you could remake stuff, as our lovely Mary there has been doing at the workshops all through the summer. So there are ways around this that we can make a difference in a community. So.
I cannot believe that the Litter Fairy is not creative. You don't come up with a name. You don't get given a name like that without having creativity behind you.
Yeah.
At this point, are there any other questions? That's kind of our things. Oh, we've got someone at the back there. Yep.
Thanks for that question. That's a very good one. We have seen a difference, and I think COVID brought in a big difference when I think the horror on people's faces when they saw the litter on the beach when the first lockdown was lifted and it was hot and sunny, and the amount of rubbish and plastic and wet wipes and goodness knows what that was left all over the beach. I think that has almost stirred some people into thinking, well, I wouldn't do that. Why are these people? And wanting to help the environment. And, sorry, what was the second part of your question? What's the best way to... Oh, yeah. And that is that is the $64,000 question, is getting more engagement. I mean, we've got a Facebook group. There's nearly 2,000 members in my Facebook group. That's very good. I'm very happy with that. But when you put events on, I mean, it's a massive turnout tonight. It's absolutely brilliant. But when you think of the number of people there are in this town, why do more people not come out to events? How do we engage with them? And I think, again, going back, this is where the Sea Monster has got all the different groups engaging now with each other. So everyone's singing the same tune and the same message. And you go to any community space now, and it's all, there's recyclings there. Don't use plastic, don't do that. So it's coming across the whole community is singing together, I think, now, and it's a great feeling.
And what gives me a lot of hope is you speak to the younger generations now,
Oh, yes.
and
Yeah.
the awareness and the passion to instigate change and develop things. I'm incredibly proud to have a few members of our Natural History Museum Youth Advisory Panel with us here
brilliant.
for the next couple of days, and we're thinking creatively about how can we go out and engage around these kind of topics, with the idea of creating some kind of immersive escape room type game, which can then be taken to different venues and different audiences.
And that's the raising awareness at community groups, schools, youth groups. I mean, I go around and visit Cubs and Brownies and anybody that will have me, really. So it's, but when I first started, it was, they didn't know anything. They didn't know that plastic was made from oil. I didn't either. So that's something I've learnt in the last 5 years. So, but the schools, the primary schools certainly didn't. When I go to them now, if I'm talking to a class of 7, 8-year-olds, they all know all that. They've learnt that in the last couple of years. So I'm getting to the stage where they know more than I do.
Sorry, Richard, I thought you were going to say something. Nope. Okay, I have a question now for all three of you, just to kind of think about and get a response from. I guess we've been talking about different levels here of individuals taking actions and how they behave through communities, through societies, business, and higher up into kind of like policy level. I guess I'm interested to know your thoughts on what everyone here can do that perhaps in different ways might affect at different levels. Quite often when it's talked about with individual action, it's only, how individuals can make an impact is with individual action. But we've been talking today about how we need to be creating a new road at all of these different levels, and just kind of like perhaps what any of your thoughts are on what, as an audience, we can go away with on those ideas. Richard, would you like to start?
Yeah, well, I mean, the one thing I would say is let's first of all think that nothing is waste, because in nature nothing is waste. You know, that actually it's Ellen MacArthur, I think, who said that, and I point you towards the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. If you want to learn about circular economy, that's a good place to go and start. And, points out that in nature nothing is a waste. So something's using whatever is being produced. And I think we should be thinking about that in our own lifestyle. And that, to me, I think was a big eye-opener, that to me is a challenge of minimizing the amount that goes in my bin, it's like, and I feel quite triumphant if it's really low after the end of the week. So that to me is something that we can all do. Then we can, in our own lives, there are places we've got a chance to influence. I mean, if you work in an office, you might be able to influence the way office supplies are bought, or the way the coffee machine you use and the type of thing. So there's little things you can do that will impinge on people you perhaps work with or in your school or so on. It's a great story. You've got Archie in the audience here. I'm going to have a chat with him tomorrow of what schools have been doing, and young people are really getting inspired to do these kind of things. So I think in our own lives we can pick little things that we might be able to do. But I think for me the first one is, let's try and stop thinking about waste and minimizing it basically, and trying our hardest not to throw things away.
And Enrico, any kind of thoughts on that similar question?
Yeah, so I've actually got two things that everyone can do. The first thing is, especially with tech, buy secondhand. There's many places where you can get secondhand tech, which has been refurbished and pretty much just as good as buying it brand new. but it means that you're not actually, manufacturing a brand new phone or whatever. If it's been repaired, then that keeps it out of the, processing site, and, it's only 17% of that is actually recycled, so it stops it from basically being thrown away. The second thing, so that's sort of at the individual responsibility level. The second thing is actually more at the collective level, but obviously it's for individuals to do, is to contact your MP about right to repair, because at the moment there's this big movement by large companies that their product is a sealed box which users can't interfere with. When something goes wrong, which it will, because planned obsolescence means that there's usually a single failure point which is designed to fail after 5 years or like 3 years in the case of phones. And they don't want you getting in there and actually repairing it. They don't want repair shops going out and actually getting in there. They want only licensed repair shops. Apple is perhaps one of the worst offenders. I'm going to call them out, but there's many other companies that do this. Licensed repair shops, they'll charge you basically more than the cost of the laptop to repair the screen so that you buy another laptop. It's not profitable for large companies to let you repair stuff. It's profitable for them to just churn out units, more and more units to get sales. So we need to have legislation to stop companies from, gating their products off to repair shops and people who are interested in repairing their own products. And that's where right to repair comes in. So it's really important that we have that legislation made in the UK, because if there's been several high-profile cases of famous YouTubers being able to repair, like, for example, the Apple the iBook or whatever, the iMac. But then they've been gone on to be sued by Apple because they were not authorized to do that, and they are distributing confidential information about the product online. So that cannot be allowed to happen. And if we do it in the UK, then hopefully, people around the world will notice and say, you know what, that's a pretty good piece of legislation, we should adopt it as well. So,
Out of interest, sorry, are there any countries that have brought that in?
I'm not aware. I looked into this very briefly before this event, so I don't know too much about the policy, but perhaps there are, or at least I'm sure there must be some countries who are looking into bringing this legislation into force. I know that there's currently a big debate raging in the US about this, but given that the US, many of these companies are residing in the US, I'm not sure that they will be the first to implement it.
And Debbie?
Yeah, sorry, I was trying to butt in there. No, I've been liaising with a guy in South Wales who specialises in right to repair. And what he is trying to introduce, and again, it's really difficult, like you say, is if there is, for appliances mainly, how do you know if somebody competent has mended your appliance? And so their company is bringing in training, but to keep it in the local economy. So instead of, if your washing machine went wrong, it would be repaired locally and the money stays in the local economy, but it would have to be repaired. And it's all the different appliances and if the people are trained and they're competent, and to have an appliance register is his big thing as well. And if you have an appliance register, so it's similar that if you go out and buy a car, you know if it's been in an accident or not. So if you go then to buy an appliance, say a washing machine or a tumble dryer, so people are sort of paranoid about tumble dryers and things catching fire, they would know whether or not how many repairs it had had. So everything would be logged and registered as an appliance, and any repairs done would be repaired by a competent certified person, because at the moment there is no certification for a standalone certification for mending appliances. There is only a certification as an electrician or something like that. So there isn't a specific standalone qualification, and that's what he's pushing and lobbying for at that end. So I think it's something like that would be vitally important. And like you say, write to your MP. That's what's needed.
Thank you very much. Before we open out to more questions, one last thing I think would be really interesting and useful to bring up, and that is, where do you, all three of you, recommend that we go as an audience to learn more about these things? What are the resources? What are the locations? You mentioned the Ellen MacArthur Foundation as being a great place.
Yeah, I think that's a good place to start. Sorry?
I think you nicked mine.
Oh, sorry.
And mine.
Well, there you go. You see, I think we all agree that is a good place to start.
But I think that might mean that there's also, I was also going to say the UN has a good program on this because it fits into the sustainable development goals, but they also have a UN charter on circular economy, so that's a good one. But that's only 2 sources. Like, that's a bit worrying in the fact that there's only 2 places that you can learn about circular economy. And the other problem is that circular economy is used in a wide variety of ways by many different people. It's actually quite nebulous, and it's sort of, never really coalesced into a solid idea. So it's important to get an example to start coalescing, what circular economy actually means, like what are the hard definitions. And I think that's also what needs to happen. Then maybe more people would start talking about it. But at the moment, yes, Ellen MacArthur Foundation is fantastic. UN has got some really solid reports and groundwork on this, but they actually need to be implemented for more people to start talking about it.
I mean, a book that really inspired me was one that was called Cradle to Cradle by Michael Braungart and William McDonough. And it talks about the fact that, we shouldn't have a cradle to grave mentality about anything. We should always go back to the sort of start. So for all the things that we do, we should be going back to, something reconstructive. So it's a bit of a heavy book. I think it's quite approachable. It's a book. If you get out of the library, it's good to read about the sort of philosophy of making sure we don't make things with the aim of them only having a fixed life. That everything goes back. So it's a sort of nature thing. So I found that very inspirational.
And I think also on a local level, if people wanted to, and if you're on social media, the North Somerset Reduce, Reuse, Recycle Facebook group is also very good, where nothing on there costs money. If people are getting rid of stuff, they put it on there, and if you want stuff that you want to get rid of. And it's amazing what people, who wants this jam jar lid? Oh, I want that. Does anyone, somebody take that? It's amazing the things that people want. It's just staggering. And, don't travel, don't go out of your way and travel for it. So there's a lot of useful information and tips on there as well. There's obviously our Cleanest Coastlines group where we save stuff. There's, going back to what that other lady was asking earlier, there's a new group, Regeneration Western, that's going to be setting up. So we'll be having events, more events. There'll be, film shows, there'll be talks, there'll be ideas coming out. So what we as a community can do. So get involved locally and do that sort of thing. And I'm sure that's the same all around the country. There's all sorts of grassroots kind of things moving, because this is what we want to see. We can't wait for the government to keep doing stuff. We need to show people. We need to, when we go and buy stuff, we take our money and take it to the local shops. We shop local. We want to drive the economy to what we want it to be, instead of people telling us what we need, or the advertisers trying to push it on us. So we need to do it from the ground up instead of the top down now, I think, and show people what we want. Because you've seen it. You see all the greenwashing that's going around at the moment. Companies know that some of us have got some money that we want to spend on something, and they want that money. So they're trying to make out that what they're selling is eco-friendly. It might not always be, so you've got to double-check that as well. So.
Yeah, I think one of the things that the COVID lockdown taught me is that, the one place that we could go and get things were little local shops. And, we went and used those, and actually it was so good that I pledged to continue to support those local shops, because they were the ones that kept us through the lockdown. And I'm pleased to say, where I live, that those shops have actually thrived, and which is terrific. And people buying local, as you've said, helps, because you're cutting down travel, you're cutting down air miles or whatever, and local products. And I didn't want to leave the European Union, but we have. But now we should take that as an opportunity to support our local producers, actually, and that's that opportunity. I know it costs a little bit more, perhaps sometimes, but you are doing things that are bringing things back to the local economy, and hopefully under a control of us in Britain, and we can make sure things are done properly. So.
A big thank you to the Sea Monster team and the Natural History Museum for putting on the event, and a big thank you to Weston-super-Mare for coming out and listening and giving great questions. So thank you very much, and see you on the Sea Monster.